The Bateman Horne Center, BHC, makes programming and information available for educational purposes only, not to provide specific medical or clinical advice. By receiving this information from non-BHC sources, you understand that there is no provider-patient relationship between you and the presenter. The views, information, or opinions expressed during these events are solely those of the presenting individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of BHC and its employees. BHC does not have any relevant financial relationships with the presenter to disclose or conflicts of interest to resolve. This session will be recorded for internal purposes only. At this time, distribution of the recording will not be permitted to BHC patients nor usage on public-facing sites. Please do not disclose any personal health information. We strive to ensure the privacy and respect of all our patients are maintained during these collaborative events. The session will begin shortly.
Good evening. Thank you for joining our September Education Series. I am Talia Dostal, Education Director here at the Bateman Horne Center. I'm excited to hear from our speaker this evening, clinical psychologist, Dr. Elizabeth Sherlock, as she discusses living with a chronic illness. Dr. Sherlock joined the Bateman Horne Center in the spring of 2018 and has had a successful career serving in the Navy JAG and later in the U.S. Air Force as a military psychologist. Upon retiring as a lieutenant colonel, she has applied her work in nursing homes, jail systems, and women's shelters. Dr. Sherlock has both professional and personal experience as a caregiver of loved ones with ME/CFS, and we are grateful to have her here today. Dr. Sherlock, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Those of you who perhaps have attended our support groups know a little bit about my history. I'll give you the 30-second version of my connection to ME/CFS. My son had ME/CFS for about 20 years, and he died about 2.5 years ago at the age of 46. His dad had ME/CFS for about 25 years and died when he was 53. And his grandmother had ME/CFS for about 40 years, and she lived into her late 70s. So the journey is different for everyone, and I have been up close and personal with ME/CFS for over 50 years. And so I decided to come and volunteer at the Bateman Horne Center and see what I could do. So every day is a chance to change your life. This picture is supposed to be a sunrise. Sadly, all of the sunrise pictures also look like sunsets. I couldn't really find one that differentiated very well. But this quotation seemed inspirational to me. Every day, in some sense, is a blank slate, and you can choose within parameters of what you're going to do with it and how you can change your life. I'm going to borrow a lot from a book, which I have a copy of the cover at the end, so you can write it down if you want to. It's called You Don't Look Sick. Anybody ever had that comment? For sure. It's by Joyce Selak and her doctor, Dr. Overman, who is a rheumatologist. And although she didn't have ME/CFS, she had an autoimmune disorder and fibromyalgia, and lots of the same symptoms that people with ME/CFS has. And she's written a very good book about how she has come to terms with her illness. It's not filled with a lot of platitudes, has a lot of good stories in it, and we'll be borrowing some of those. But she divides her book into 4 sections, and I thought that was a useful jumping off point for this talk. First was getting sick. What happens when you first find out that things aren't right? Second is being sick, how you start to come to terms with the fact that you have a chronic illness. Third is grief and acceptance, the things that you've lost and how you come to terms with accepting those losses and accepting your new life, and finally living well. And of course, living well is perhaps the most important part of this. So those are going to be kind of the sections of the talk as we go forward. So in terms of getting sick, I read a different book called In the Country of Illness. I also have it up at the end. And although he didn't have a chronic illness, he had cancer and his ex-wife died of cancer. He is a very entertaining writer, and he talks a lot about dealing with the medical system. And here are a couple of the great quotes from his book. It's a very entertaining book if you want to read it. When we are sick or taking care of someone who is sick, we feel as though we are suddenly outside of the borders of what we consider everyday life and in another place. And he's, of course, talking about going into hospitals. I call that place malady. Malady is another country, scary and strange. Its border is only one microbe, a rogue cell, or an accident away. When we are scared, feeling out of control, feeling like a unit on a conveyor belt of the medical industrial complex, grateful for the casual mercies of doctors, nurses, technicians, aides, and receptionists. And he describes a lot of these people in very vivid and sometimes quite humorous terms. And confused by the rearranged relationships. Rearranged relationships. We'll talk more about that. With friends and family members, it's easy to imagine being in a foreign land, trying to learn the language and customs, calculate the currency, and remember the landmarks, all the while suffering the ill effects from the local water. You know, when you're feeling sick, you have the least resources to deal with all of this complexity, and yet there you are. So in the getting sick parameter, this is from You Don't Look Sick, this is what the doctor had to say. He felt like the first thing that people need to do is free themselves from fear. Again, you're in this strange country of illness and doctors and medicine, and you're afraid. People are afraid. And so he has some suggestions about acknowledging your fear. What is your worst fear? Get it out there. If you don't have a trusted friend or counselor, then have a journal. But get it out there. Are you afraid you're going to die? Are you afraid you're going to be incapacitated? What is it? And the more that we can speak these fears and get them out of ourselves and on paper or in a conversation, the less power they have over us. And it gives you a little bit of direction too, to have an idea. What am I really afraid of here? You know, is it pain? What is it? So you can think about that. His second suggestion is to understand that the mind and body are connected. He said many of the people that he sees, again, he's a rheumatologist, what he calls the doctor of last resort. And he says if he tries to suggest to people sometimes that stress and the things that they're thinking and experiencing are making their symptoms worse, they get very defensive. He's not trying to say that your illness is all in your mind. That is not what that's about. But if you think about it, think about the last time you got very stressed. You had an argument with a spouse, or you were very disappointed in a relationship. Those stresses exacerbate your symptoms. They make them much worse. And so he does a lot with trying to get people to realize the mind-body connection, and that reducing those stressful interactions and reducing stressful attitudes, all those things are going to make your symptoms more manageable. So the third one that he talks about is build a supportive healthcare team and become a team player. You know, find doctors that are helpful. The woman that wrote this book, Joy, she has a thing that she calls her 3 strikes. So she'll go see a doctor 3 times. And if he's not receptive, not helpful, rigid, has a prejudice against her illness, that's it. She won't go again. And over the years, she's built a number of different doctors that deal with different aspects of her illness, and that's her healthcare team. And she calls Dr. Overman sort of her coach. He's kind of the head, and he's sort of runs the whole thing in the manner of like a coach, and sort of helps her deal with the other specialists and all of that. But it's a sort of a team effort. And so that's what he recommends, that you try and think of your doctors as a team, and try and get them to communicate if you can with each other, or do that through you by taking good notes and having an agenda when you go in, and doing things like that so you get good care. And I liked his quote. He says, "When illness becomes chronic, it does require learning to live with it. However, it does not and should not mean living with it alone. You need that team." So another book that I found very helpful is this one, which I also have a picture of the cover at the end, How to Be Sick by Toni Bernhard. So she is an ME/CFS patient, and she's a very deeply practicing Buddhist. And so her book is very Buddhist inspired, and it's much deeper than the other book. But some of the things in it, if you're not really drawn to the Buddhist philosophy, would be a bit challenging. And so I've kind of used some things from both in this talk. But I thought that this audience would kind of get a kick out of her list. So when she first got sick, she saw 3 infectious disease doctors, 2 ENT specialists, a rheumatologist. I mean, it sounds like a partridge in a pear tree, right? An endocrinologist, a gastroenterologist, a neurologist, cardiologist, and 2 acupuncturists. And but I counted that up, and that's only 12. I think most of our patients have seen at least 25 doctors. 12 is actually a small number. So I'm sure people in this audience can relate to that. And also relate to the frustration. Remember, every one of those doctors, there was hope. This person will be able to diagnose me. This person will have, if not a cure, something that will really help. And probably didn't happen. So anyway, that's a very interesting book too. So back from How to Be Sick, she says chronic illness forces us and our spouses and caregivers to do a number of things that we don't want to do, but we're forced to. First, weather the relentlessness of symptoms. That's an easy little bullet point, but when you think about what that really means in terms of people's lives, those symptoms, they come and they come and they come and they wax and they wane and they change, and they just change your life. And so it's a very relentless kind of thing that for many, many people doesn't ever completely go away. Some people have wonderful remissions, but many people do not. Second, people have to come to terms with a more isolated life. And this is one of the big issues that comes up in the support groups and in counseling, that the world gets smaller because you're not going to work anymore. You're not going out and doing things, and not very much of the world comes in. You have to go out. And luckily we have the internet now, so that gives people, even that are homebound, at least some opportunity, for example, to attend a lecture like this that they wouldn't be able to do in person. But still, it's a much more isolated life. Third, cope with emotional distress. On top of all this, on top of all of the symptoms, the pain and the brain fog and the nausea and all of the things, it's upsetting. There's emotional distress as well. And this often manifests as fear about the future. Am I ever going to get better? Am I just going to get worse? How much worse? What's the end game here? What's tomorrow going to be like? far future and near future. And many people have a lot of fear about that. Next, handle the misunderstanding of others. Gee, have any of us been there? You don't look sick. You can do this. You know, all you need to do, I love a woman in the support group said her doctor told her she just needed to drink more water and lose 30 pounds and she'd be fine. That's just one of the best ever. Of course, that didn't do a thing for her. And even doctors misunderstand, friends misunderstand, spouses misunderstand. People, it's very, very hard for them to grasp the depth of the fatigue and pain and just general misery that people experience if they haven't been there. It's just really hard to grasp. And so that misunderstanding, you know, it gets wearying. How much time do you spend explaining to people, and then you never know if they're really going to hear you, and et cetera. Then you have to, on top of that, deal with the healthcare system and deal with the disability system and deal with paperwork and deal with appointments and getting to them and paying for them and all of that. And it's not easy. That's not easy for anybody, much less someone who has little energy and brain fog and you know, they're tired and they're in pain, and then they have, you know, EOBs that they have to deal with, a stack like this and go through. And so that just exacerbates the situation. And then finally, you're forced to adapt to many unexpected and sudden life changes. You know, things are going along and then suddenly, boom, they're not the way they were yesterday. And that's very hard for people. Okay, so being sick. So this was at the heading in one of the chapters. You can argue with the way things are. You'll lose, but only 100% of the time. So, something to think about. Trying to accept the way things are. Okay. More of being sick from You Don't Look Sick. So this was from the doctor. He felt like a really important first step for people is learn to manage your pain. Because pain is just so debilitating. It gets in the way of everything. And so, you know, medications, rest, massage, hot baths, whatever it is that helps you, you know, learn to take advantage of those things, learn to manage them in an effective way, and, you know, learn to make the most of the things that will help you decrease your pain, because you can't do anything when you're in pain. Second, he says, let illness be a life teacher. You know, realize that there are things for you to learn through the process of this illness. You know, and sadly, many of them are things we don't want to learn. But think about your life. A lot of the things that really have taught us the greatest lessons are things we didn't want to learn. You know, when I grew up, I had to learn how to work. Ooh, I didn't like that. That wasn't fun. I was a lazy kid, and I had to learn how to work. And it was a painful process. And so many of these painful processes do teach us important lessons for life. Third, he said, don't confuse making peace with giving up. And we're going to talk some more about grief and acceptance and about not confusing the idea of coming to an acceptance of illness with giving up. Because some people think, well, if I'm not fighting this, if this isn't my enemy, then I'm giving up. And it's not the same thing. There's a way to embrace your illness, but not give up in terms of making the most of every day. So they're kind of two separate things, but you know, some people confuse those. And finally, listen to your body and find your own balance. And as I talk with patients and as we talk in the support groups, This is one of the hardest things because learning to pace yourself, learning to slow down, learning to find your own balance, not looking out there at what everybody else is doing. You have to find inside of yourself where your energy level is, where your pain level is, what you can do, what you can't do. You can't please everybody, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is a really important one. We're going to talk about this later a little more. But listening to your body is really important. And I like this quotation. The quiet activities that illness demands can give you the opportunity to listen to your body differently. I think that's the key word, differently, and more closely. You might ask whether a symptom is a new problem, a variation on a past flare, or a variation on a past flare. Are your fears and anxieties influencing your disease or just how you perceive it? In other words, if you're feeling a lot of pain, is it because you're upset about something? Is that making it worse? Things like that. And so you have to pay a lot of attention to your body. Okay. And so this kind of went on and said, you need to listen to the external environment around you differently. Do you have negative people in your life that need to be tuned out? And this is often an issue we deal with in counseling, where people that are not supportive, but they're people that are around. So at what point do you just say, look, I don't need your opinion anymore? Can you pay more attention to and learn from those people who are willing to support and share with you? And I think the idea here is to put your emotional energy into the people that really support you and that help you feel better, and to not put your energy into the people that are negative and make you feel worse. Which part of you? So he felt like there were these 4 basic needs that people had: the physical, spiritual, social, emotional, or professional, and that they all needed to be attended to. So which one needs attention today? You know, are you having a lot of physical pain? Do you need some kind of spiritual inspiration? Are you lonely, or is, something in your social world not right? Or is there something emotional going on with you, or something with your profession or lack thereof? Are those the things that are weighing on you today? Which one? Which one needs attention? Patients of mine who have learned to listen to what their body is telling them come to understand they cannot fix everything by just trying harder. You've heard the old line, work smarter, not harder. And so I think that's what he's getting at, is when you just try harder, that's a place of tension. Trying. And tension, of course, does what? Pain, fatigue. It's going to just bring on all your symptoms. And so the trying has to come from a different place where it does not produce that tension. The next section we're going to talk about, let's move it along, is grief and acceptance. So people eventually, most of them, come to some kind of acceptance of their illness. And Joy, in the You Don't Look Sick, she feels like you have to go through the grief process, and I think this is pretty standard in psychology, that you have to really acknowledge what you've lost before you can really move on, that you have to sort of go through the grief to come out the other side. And I thought she really wrote a lovely description of what she lost. She'd been a stockbroker before she became ill. And she said, in the months that follow, I'm no longer who I am. So that's the thing. Who are you? I'm no longer a broker, a businesswoman, a working professional. I can no longer proudly answer the question, what do you do? I am just a daytime sleeper, a doctor appointment maker, a brain-addled person filling out paperwork, 5 minutes working in the garden, and I collapse in pain. 20 minutes at the sewing machine and I am numb with fatigue. Everything I try to do is riddled with mistakes because I don't think straight. I am lost. I am no one. I am nothing. I cry. And I think most ME/CFS and many fibromyalgia patients have been at this place, where they just feel like if I don't have the identity I once had, that I'm nothing. And part of the problem with that is our society. We're a society of doers. You know, we're not like, say, Indian society where there's a whole tradition of meditation and just being. It's like, no, the first question in any social interaction, what do you do? Not what are you? And so we're doers, and if you can't do, then what are you? And it requires quite a redefinition of who we are to move out of that doing mentality. And she goes on, in a very real sense, illness had taken my life away. I was sentenced to live with physical pain in real time, indefinitely. I could not work. I could not even plan my days. I could not expect to be cured. Going forward, how was I to rejoice each day? It's a rich irony to learn that there's a special peace to be found in the journey through suffering. Because of this revelation, I have come to see myself. So this is when she moved from grief to acceptance. I have come to see myself not as a sick person, but as a person who enjoys a life that is full and abundant. I see myself as a healthy person with an illness. So I thought that was quite profound. I appreciate every day and look for the good in it. So how did she do this? Well, she has her top 10 list. And, you know, we could spend an hour on each one of these, but we'll just kind of go through them. So her number one thing is take care of yourself first. And of course, this goes along with what the doctor had to say. And she had some pretty interesting things to say about that. Because we all want to help other people. We all want to meet other people's expectations. Many of us have been mothers and caregivers and spouses, and we're used to a lot of giving. And the idea of moving out of sort of that giving role and into a taking role is very difficult. It's not easy. And taking care of yourself first, you know, that's put on your own oxygen mask, you know, on the plane. Many people have a very hard time doing that. And she says that when she starts feeling upset, when she calls it in a muddle, she asks herself three things. One, what is really going on here? The answer is not what I'd like or what I think should be or what I fantasize, but rather the result of taking an honest look at present circumstances that are making me feel stressed and uncomfortable. So what is really stressing me out here? Is it my expectations, or is it other people's expectations, or something I can't do? What is it? What's really stressing me out? Second, what do I need to say or do to take loving care of myself? So when you're in that stressed moment, how do you take care of yourself? How can you be kind to yourself? And finally, her third question is, what is my power for the good? In other words, what can I do that'll make this situation good? And if there isn't anything, then she tries to extricate herself as quickly as she can. So that's her take on take care of yourself first. Second, never give up. You know, certainly people get discouraged. Certainly it seems long. My husband's mother used to say, they've been married for 50 years. She said, it's not a long time, it just seems long. So It's a long journey, and often it seems very long. But don't give up. Learn to be honest about how you're feeling. This is oh, how are you? I'm fine. We all want to be fine. And it's sometimes very hard to say, I'm not doing too well today, or I'm really tired today, but I'll try and go on with the meeting, or, whatever it is that you're doing. Learn to be honest with how you're feeling. And fourth, enroll in the school of whatever works. And in this, she had a discussion about just whatever kinds of treatments. Some alternative medicines, things like acupuncture, she found to be quite helpful. Some people find different diets, gluten-free, things like that, to be helpful. Just try things, and if something works for you, great. And I'm sure you've all experienced this. You meet someone, you tell them you have this illness, they say, oh, this will fix you, as if you've never thought of it. But sure, try these things. The ones that work, keep, and the ones that don't, just walk away from. But she says, whatever works, continue to do it. Fifth, we're make friends with fatigue. So what does she mean by that? She has an interesting take on that. So she talks about the fact that she can work from 10 to 2 in the daytime, and then by 2, she's fatigued, and she really has to rest. And so when she does things with friends, she'll say, I have to be back home, or have to be back at the hotel if they're out somewhere by 3, because I have to rest. And she says, interestingly, many of them say, oh, goody, do we get a rest period too? That everybody needs to rest. That we're just such a driven population. And then she says, one of the things I often hear when I speak at patient conferences is the difficulty people have slowing down. They feel that if they don't do everything they used to do, the illness will have beaten them. And she says she had a friend that really saw this illness as the enemy, and she just had to keep fighting. And she says, I tried to tell her the illness was part of herself, not a separate thing, and not her enemy. If you will just give this resting thing a chance, I guarantee you are going to love it. I can testify I'm so glad I made friends with fatigue. And I think this is part of the problem we have with pacing. What pacing is about is learning how much you can do and resting when you need to. But that doesn't go along with the outward world schedule. You have to have an inner knowledge of when it is that you need to rest, and then act on that. Don't ignore it. 6 was live as a child, and what she means by that is just be delighted in little things. If you've had kids, sometimes, you buy them the expensive toy, and what do they like? The box. We've all been there. Just little things. It's interesting online. There's a whole thing of where you can watch people open boxes. That people put these videos up of opening their Amazon boxes. It seems ridiculous to me, but apparently kids just love this sort of thing. And so that's an example of seeing the world as a child. Just little things that maybe other people don't even notice. A butterfly, a flower, whatever, that may bring you some delight. Just pay attention to those things instead of just glossing right over them. Her 7th one was step out of the box. Occasionally push yourself, not too often, but when you feel like you can, push yourself to do something that's out of your comfort zone. Because you may find that this new activity or meeting this new person or whatever really gives you a lift. And so once in a while, you need to step out of the box. Her 8th one is search for silver linings. Always try and look for the glasses half full side of things if you can, and see what silver linings are there. Her 9th was find a way to share your gifts. You still have gifts. And so even if you're housebound, there may be ways on the internet or there may be things you can do. We had one person in the support group who said, she couldn't get out much, but she decided to foster kittens because that was something that she could do. And I just thought that was very sweet, So she's got these little kittens that she takes care of. So there are things. If you just really look, you can find something that you can do to share your gifts. And her last one was be still. And I felt like this was very important. And this went along with the idea of the more Buddhist book, which is all about being still and letting go of all of our expectations and our desires and all that kind of thing. And she describes a situation where she met a friend for lunch, and the friend's daughter had chronic fatigue. And she's talking about, doctors. And she says the mother was focused on diagnoses, treatments, therapies, studies, and causes of this, etc. And she says, finally, I reached out and touched her shoulder and said, if your daughter can embrace the reality of this illness in her life and make peace with it, she'll have the opportunity to learn at a very young age what most of us never learn in our whole lives. She can learn to be still. Help her do that, and you will have given her a very great gift. So that was her last one, be still. If you're still, you can listen to what there is in the world. You can hear the unsaid. You can feel the turning of life in a way that people don't when they're just rushing around and they've got the TV on every second and earphones in and looking at their phone, and they never take that moment to just be still and sort of to really be one with life. So that's what she did to move from grief through acceptance to living well. Finally, I found this quotation that I thought was very inspirational. And it started with, your new life is going to cost you your old one. It's going to cost you your comfort zone and your sense of direction. It's going to cost you relationships and friends. It's going to cost you being liked and understood. But it doesn't matter, because the people who are meant for you are going to meet you on the other side, and you're going to build a new comfort zone around the things that actually move you forward. And instead of liked, you're going to be loved. Instead of understanding, you're going to be seen. All you're going to lose is what was built for a person you no longer are. Let it go. So that's my talk. And here are the books. I put them up because I know that people are going to look at this online, and then they can find the references. So, do we have any questions?
Do we have any questions from our viewers? We've had some great comments come in. We have a lot of folks from the East Coast joining us, so that's fun
that's
to
nice.
see. I know for myself, I've already added the how to be sick and you don't look sick to my Amazon shopping list. So they are out there. We're getting some thank yous coming through.
Good.
Take just another couple minutes here to see if anything trickles in.
Well, I'll put in a little plug while we're waiting for our support group. We have an MECFS support group That's the second Tuesday of every month, and it's online. And then on the third Tuesday, we have a fibromyalgia support group, and it's smaller, but it's also very interesting. And so, please join us for those. You have to sign up ahead, but it's free, and it's, everybody can join, and you can talk if you want, or you can just watch, whichever, strikes you. And I think people have gotten a lot out of them.
Yeah, there's a lot of resources that folks who join share with one another, and I know that those just continue to be shared on, and that's the purpose of these.
Good.
So, if we don't have any questions, I just want to thank you again for your time. This was a wonderful presentation. We hope to see you all at the October 2nd session, where we'll be hearing from Dr. Bateman. She will be discussing overcoming access and barriers to care. Thank you.
Thanks.